Hello, this is Anna Laura Brown, host of the Autoimmune Rehab podcast, where we talk about how to actually thrive and heal your autoimmune condition rather than just covering it up with pills or changing your diet and hoping you'll feel better one day. We feature solo episodes on helpful topics and interviews with guests who have actually walked in your shoes with autoimmune disorders and or who have years of experience in helping people to thrive and not just survive with autoimmune challenges. I'm a health coach who started this podcast because I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2018 and wanted to inspire hope and transform health for people with autoimmune challenges. So keep listening and let's get you the help and hope you really need. This is the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast. So today I am really happy to welcome Rachel Posner onto the podcast. Rachel has been working for over 20 years now as a yoga therapist, and as part of her role, she works a lot with mindfulness, the immune system, the nervous system, and helping a lot of people who have autoimmune conditions. So, welcome to Autoimmune Rehab, Rachel. And why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about who are you?
Okay, thanks for having me. I'm Rachel. I have been in this kind of wellness world for the last 20 to 25 years. And my background is I have a master's in counseling. I am a certified yoga therapist and yoga instructor. And I've just sort of drawn all those worlds together to create kind of a mind, body, brain approach.
That's awesome. I love that. So it's not very often that we hear people that come from, like a background in counseling that then end up also doing yoga and, the mindfulness and that kind of stuff. Did you start
Mhm.
out doing like traditional counseling first, or how did that journey evolve for you a little bit?
While I was getting my master's, I was immediately aware that I was not getting trained in any sort of somatic approach. And I felt like that was a big missing piece. So even as I was in that training, I was already investigating where I could get somatic training and combine those two worlds. So it was obvious to me right away that at least in the training I was getting, which was 20 plus years ago, so I don't think it's necessarily the same now. But we were not aware of the mind body connection, and we weren't bringing the body into the therapeutic process. And I knew that I wanted to go in that direction. So I sort of started in that direction right out of the gate.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And you're right. I mean, I think it wasn't as well known. I think it's becoming more recognized now, but even then, it still surprises me how many people don't really recognize that. So I know
Mm-hmm.
one of the buzzwords, if you will, a lot of people toss around is the word mindfulness. Describe
Mm-hmm.
for us, in your opinion, what exactly is mindfulness when you hear that word?
For me, the simplest definition is paying attention to the present moment without judgment. So you can do anything mindfully. Right now, I am sitting with you. I can also at the same time notice that I'm breathing. I might notice my physical experience. And I'm not working with this background track that says I'm doing something wrong. I could also be sitting with you and thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner and a conversation I had earlier and beating myself up for not being articulate, right? So being able to practice coming into the present moment and to try to do so with a background tone of compassion, self-friendliness, that's mindfulness.
That's awesome. I love that description. And how do you feel like mindfulness and yoga work together?
Well, you could again do yoga very unmindfully. You might not be paying attention to what's happening in your body. You might be thinking about a conversation you're having later and not be in the present moment at all. Especially if you're talking about yoga in terms of movement, which is how most of us are thinking about yoga these days. But if I'm moving my body while considering where I am in space, what sensations are arising, whether there are emotions that are coming up, if there are thoughts that are coming in, do they have to do with the present? If not, maybe I'll try to shift them to the periphery and come back to actually what's happening right now. That would be a mindful version of yoga. And we're not always in a mindful version of yoga, even though it seems like, well, that's clearly a mindfulness practice. Certainly it is, but that doesn't mean that we're showing up that way.
Yeah, I can totally see that because, yeah, you definitely could, do the moves, but not really be mindfulness. Still be thinking about what's for lunch or,
Exactly.
what you're going to do tomorrow for your day-to-day list and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So obviously, people, the majority of whom are listening to this struggling with autoimmune conditions, they have, varying degrees of issues with their immune system, their nervous system, their chronic pain, all that kind of stuff. How do you feel like the nervous system and, maybe even the immune system somewhat, but mostly the nervous system and autoimmune and chronic pain, how are those all interconnected?
So your nervous system determines whether you are in fight, flight, or freeze. In other words, whether you're feeling dysregulated, really stressed out, overwhelmed, shut down, or whether you're feeling settled, grounded in your rest and digest system. So it's the difference between whether you're in your sympathetic nervous system or your parasympathetic. And we want to default to the parasympathetic. We want to feel calm and grounded and able to take on the challenges of the day. When we're not able to do that, when we get dysregulated, everything gets out of whack, right? Because the point is to keep us alive. The nervous system has determined that there is a threat involved. And so our blood pressure goes up, our stress levels go up, our vision narrows. And what gets suppressed is our digestive system, our immune system, all the systems that are not needed in an absolute emergency get suppressed so that we can focus more on those systems that will keep us alive in that sort of emergency situation. The problem is we're usually not in an emergency situation. We have just kind of turned on that sympathetic response because of stress. And so that makes everything harder. So if we're struggling with autoimmune and our autonomic nervous system is really out of whack, easily triggered into that stress response, it's going to make everything more difficult. It will make our pain more intense. It will make our stress levels more intense. Our heart rate increases, and our body can't focus as much on the strength of the immune system, the endocrine system, digestive system, all the other things that impact our autoimmune issues. So it's really important to learn how to manage the nervous system so that we can more gracefully manage the autoimmune issue.
That's awesome. I love that. So, what would be some simple ways that somebody can do that?
The simplest way is to get mindful, meaning see if you can bring yourself into the present and recognize that some things about the present moment might be unpleasant, right? It is true that if we are suffering, if we have pain, that's not pleasant. No one wants to have pain. But what makes our pain worse is the conversation we're having about the pain. So if what I'm doing is kind of perseverating on my discomfort, and then on top of it, I'm telling a whole story about the discomfort, my frustrations, my negative emotions about it, all of which is reasonable. So I'm not saying this with any judgment, but it is true that if we spend a lot of time on that story about the discomfort gets worse. So if we can instead notice what's happening in the present moment with a background tone of, it's okay, you're doing your best, let's calm things down a little bit, then generally the pain will decrease a bit because in part, that sort of calm tone and that being present helps us to shift into that parasympathetic response. So anything we can do to calm ourselves down, to ground ourselves is going to help with the discomfort that we feel from the disease that we're dealing with. And there are lots of techniques for that calming. It's not just noticing what's happening in the present moment, but doing things like taking a long exhale, making sure that the inhale is a diaphragmatic breath, meaning you can feel some movement around the low belly, the low ribs when you breathe in instead of just up at the chest. So lots of techniques like breathing, like noticing the present moment, like feeling your feet on the floor. These are all things that can help to ground you and settle your nervous system.
Awesome, that's great. So then obviously also things like meditation potentially too could help with that.
Absolutely.
Grounding
Absolutely.
yourself outside, like going barefoot and walking around in the grass and the dirt, that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, nature is one of the best sort of anecdotes to an overwhelmed nervous system. So I'd say if I had to pick my top three, I would definitely have nature in one of them. And it doesn't have to be a big hike. Like we are all dealing with different kinds of physical issues. even just being in your backyard, finding a tree at the park, any amount, any kind of spending time in nature and feeling yourself there. So not spending the time that you're at the park or on your neighborhood walk thinking about all the difficulties and all the stressors, but seeing if you can give yourself a break and just one of the easiest ways to give yourself a break and reroute your awareness is to use your senses. So to notice, what does that tree look like? What's the quality of the green? Does it feel comforting to be by that tree versus that tree? Like using your senses helps to bring you into that relationship with nature. And that's what really helps to settle your nervous system.
That's awesome. Cool. So even you could potentially even explore things like doing yoga outside rather than indoors in a studio or something like that.
Yes, that would be awesome. Although I do recognize that it's hard. There's weather, there's uneven ground, there's all kinds of things that kind of make us like, it's like we want to be as comfortable as possible. And outside yoga is wonderful, but not always comfortable. So I'd say whatever you can do, do it. I try not to put too many qualifiers because each one of those is like one more reason not to. So take the path of least resistance and do the thing that makes you feel calm and relaxed and safe and feel good about it. Don't feel like, oh, but if I had just added this, it would have been better.
That's awesome. Yeah, for sure. I bring that up just because I've noticed lately around here, well, we're starting to come more fall and winter where they probably won't be able to do it as much, but I've noticed like spring and summer, there's some different yoga instructors that have been advertising yoga outside in the park, and I was thinking, oh, okay.
It is lovely. It is really lovely.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. So what else do you feel like people should know about, the whole general idea of, like yoga therapist and mindfulness and that kind of thing? What else have I not asked you that people need to know about?
I think we are hearing a lot about meditation these days, and meditation is like yoga, a mindfulness practice. And there's so much research now on the benefits of meditation in all areas of wellness. And I also think that meditation can be really difficult because we are going from an intense day with lots of stressors, and then we have this idea that now we're just supposed to sit and not think. So I would say to, if you can, let go of the idea of what you think meditation should be and take a beginning class, work with someone, watch a YouTube video, whatever you need to do to get a little bit more informed on really simple meditations. So all meditation is asking yourself to focus on something. It could be as simple as counting the breath in and counting the breath out, and maybe even just doing that for 3 minutes. You can start really small and really simple. So I think meditation, we know how helpful it is, but I just like to give a little bit of encouragement to starting small. And if you feel like you're giving it a try and it feels really difficult, try a different way, reach out for a little help, and try not to make it so. I think we make things difficult because we have an idea of how they should be, and it doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I think you're totally right. I think we do make things difficult. And yeah, I mean, starting small is always a good advice for anything at all, for sure. So if somebody is looking to potentially hire somebody to actually, work with them on their mindfulness and their yoga, that kind of thing, what kinds of questions or things should somebody be looking for in somebody that they might potentially want to hire to help them?
I think you should ask about their background and their certifications. I think you should ask about their approach. And I think that a person should be willing to have a conversation with you that you don't have to pay for to check in and see if it's a good fit. Because one of the things about the nervous system is we are constantly assessing the other person's nervous system below the level of thinking. So if you meet with me and it just doesn't feel, you don't have to overthink why. If it doesn't feel like my presence is calming for you, if you don't feel comfortable, one of the things that we're doing with nervous system regulation is cultivating a sense of safety. And if you don't feel safe with a person, you shouldn't work with them. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, but I'm really a big believer in trust your gut. So if you're going to work with a yoga therapist or a mindfulness coach, they should be willing to have a conversation with you, whether it's over the phone or over Zoom, so that you can kind of feel one another out. And you have a chance to see if you feel really comfortable with this person. I think that's important, especially around nervous system regulation.
Yeah, that's true. I can totally see that. Absolutely. So, along with that, I'm assuming you probably work with clients all over the world. So, you're doing a lot of work virtually. Maybe you work with people in person in your local area too, maybe some of that, maybe not so much.
I do both. I
You
work
do
with
both.
people in person and online. I work with individuals and I work with groups. So I try to meet people where they are. Some people really resonate with a one-on-one experience. Other people resonate with a group experience. We all have different financial situations. So I try to offer my services in lots of different ways so they can meet the needs of whatever the needs are.
That's cool. So, let's say somebody goes ahead, they hire you. What does that very first like session look like? Like, what would you actually do with somebody in a practical
So,
sense?
in part, the definition of yoga therapy is meeting someone where they are. So, it really depends on what kind of support that person is looking for. Sometimes I'm working with people who want a little bit more psychoed, right? They want to understand how the nervous system works, they want to understand the science, and they want some simple tools that help to stimulate that parasympathetic or calming, grounded response in their nervous system. Other times, people are seeing me for similar reasons that they might see a therapist. They're working through trauma, and they have an anxiety disorder, they have an autoimmune disease, and there are a lot of emotions that are coming up. So I take a mind, body, brain approach, which means I'm always working with mindfulness practices that are also kind of sort of at the intersection of neuroscience and psychology. And I can talk about what this particular practice, how that practice will affect your psyche and your brain at the same time. So it's a funny question, like, what will it look like? Sometimes it looks like people are laying in a relaxed state and we're having a conversation. Their eyes might be open or closed. I might be guiding a meditation. They might be guiding it by just telling me about their day. But I'm always going to be asking, what are you noticing in your body as we're exploring this? Because that's the piece, that's the somatic piece of letting the body sort of have a conversation with us.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, because I'm sure, yeah, like you said, I mean, we're all created differently, so there's no way, we all have different unique challenges. There's no way that any one person's not gonna, it's gonna be different for different people. So yeah,
Exactly.
I love that.
And that's sort of what yoga therapy looks like, or my mindfulness coaching. But I also do teach yoga. It's just that when I'm doing yoga therapy, people often assume that they will be doing yoga. We're not, we're rarely doing any yoga in yoga therapy.
I'm
It's a
sure.
much more kind of meditative experience. I also teach yoga if that's something that you want. And that's really like, we're going to take a yoga class now and we're going to work on yoga as a mindfulness practice.
Well, awesome. So how do you feel like doing things like yoga can help with like improving the nervous system and reducing pain, things like that?
Um, because we're checking in with the body versus, oftentimes we're checking out. We feel uncomfortable, we feel overwhelmed, we're in our head a lot. So we're not that aware of what's actually happening in the body. And yoga gives you an opportunity to really take stock, to really notice what are the sensations in my body and how can I attend to them. If I'm feeling a sensation that's unpleasant, if I'm feeling a lot of constriction or pain, is there any sort of movement or breathing that I could do that could actually address that and lessen that discomfort? So there's a way that yoga can directly impact our physical experience. And it also really helps to build that mind body connection because we are experiencing or practicing interoception, which is just simply paying attention to the sensations in the body. And that does a lot of things. It helps us to to pay attention and respond to what's happening in the body, but it also helps to do things like regulate emotion, increase our sense of agency. There's all these sort of byproducts of paying attention to sensation. And also part of yoga can be things at the end, like guided meditations that sometimes happen in our ending relaxation practice. And that's a really nice opportunity to work with other tools that can help with pain. Things like if there's a pain, for example, in my right shoulder, I could also notice that there is not a pain in my left shoulder. So we can get really over focused on pain points for understandable reasons. Pain draws our attention. But places where there are sensations that are pleasant or neutral tend to not draw our attention. So when we take in the wholeness of what's happening in the body, it can help us to kind of relax around those places where there's additional tension, because we start to notice this is a place actually that feels kind of nice. And I could hold my attention there for a few seconds or a few breaths before I make my way back to that pain point. So there are a number of kind of more meditative tools that we can use to help decrease the pain. Even just the amount of tension that we can release in yoga. Wherever we have pain, we'll tend to tense around that pain point, and tension creates more pain. So if we can find a way to relax some of the tension that we are carrying around the pain, then generally the pain will decrease. So there's lots of kind of like little tricks and tools you can work with in yoga and meditation to decrease your pain points.
That's awesome. I love that because, yeah, you're absolutely right. I've noticed that myself that, when I've had pain, that, yeah, that's definitely the case for sure. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing this. I think this has been really interesting and valuable information. So if we were, or well, or if you rather, Rachel, were to go back in time to, let's say, 25 years ago, before you knew really what you know now about yoga and therapy and all that kind of thing, what do you feel like is something that you wish you would have known that you want others to know about?
I wish that all children were taught how to understand their nervous system. I wish that we were taught that fight, flight, and freeze is a beautiful defensive response that our bodies do to keep us alive and to keep us safe, and that there are lots of ways we can get to know our nervous system so that we can feel like we don't actually have to move into that fight or flight or freeze response so quickly, because our body kind of creates habits of those responses. And if we're under a lot of stress, we get triggered into those habits more quickly. So I just think a bigger understanding of the nervous system is so valuable. It's been invaluable to me in not just my work, but in all of my relationships and as a parent. And I wish that we taught our kids that.
That's great. Yeah, because I definitely think not only do we not learn about it as kids, we don't even know about it as adults,
Yeah,
We don't really understand. We're like the nervous system. What exactly does that do?
right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it protects us a lot, but it also can sort of keep us small. Like the thing to remember about the nervous system is it just cares about us staying alive. It doesn't care if we're happy. It doesn't care if we're comfortable. It wants us to live. And so it will see threats where there often aren't real threats. There are places that we feel uncomfortable, but they're not going to kill us. And
Yeah.
so for me, there's both an appreciation for the nervous system, but also an ability to work with it and calm it down.
Awesome. That's great. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, where would the best way for somebody to get in touch with you be?
The easiest way is to just go on my website, which is rachelposner.com. And on my website, you can send me an email, you can join my email list. There's a free practice actually to calm your nervous system. So that's sort of the most direct way to find me. And if you send me an email, I will answer it. I answer my emails and I love talking to people. So if you have any questions about anything that's come up today, I'm happy to go back and forth via email for a little bit and answer your questions. So that's one way you can find me.
Awesome. So we will make sure that we have both your email address and your website. Like you said, again, it's rachelposner.com, but we'll have it linked below in the description. And I know we were talking, as we were talking before, you were saying that you have like a little kind of like a meditation type event series things coming up the first week of October. So this is coming out the end of September. So those of you that are listening within the first week or so of the podcast coming out will probably be able to access it. Those of you that are listening later on, may have already passed, but tell us about that.
It's a October meditation series. I'm meeting once a week. I have both a live and a Zoom component, or in person and Zoom component. And it's really looking at 5 different meditation techniques that do different things. So the first component is learn a technique that might be helpful and learn what it does so that you'll know when you might practice that technique versus a different one. But then it's also looking at while you are attempting to, let's say, pay attention to the breath or notice the sensations in your body, what's the background track? Because inevitably we're human and we have all kinds of thoughts going on in the background. And in meditation, we're taught to notice that we're floating off and come back to the object at hand. But in this practice, we're going to look at whether it might be interesting to notice what's actually coming up. Maybe the same thing is coming up over and over, and that has information for you as well. That's telling you this is something to pay attention to. And then the third component is to notice what the tone of that background track is. Is it compassionate? Is it judgmental? What kind of suffering comes out of the tone that we use when we talk to ourselves? So it's sort of like a three component meditation class, and we'll meet 5 times in October. And then throughout the week, you'll have opportunities to practice on your own.
Awesome. That sounds great. So we'll link to that below as well. We'll include information on that for those of you that are catching this in time. And, for those of you that aren't, I'm sure she probably does similar things on an ongoing basis. You can
I
reach
do.
out and find out what the next thing is that's coming on if you miss this boat. So
Yeah, I do. Similar things all the time.
awesome. Sounds great, Rachel. Thank you for coming on. So, for those of you who are listening this far, if you have enjoyed it, please feel free to either send one or both of us feedback. We'd appreciate a rating, review on the podcast, share it with other people, help more people find it, and take care. And we will catch you soon on another episode of the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast.